had that eerie feeling something is off with reality? Like a scene from The Matrix. Sometimes the real world seems to stutter or glitch, and it's all caught on live TV. Imagine watching a live news report and suddenly the reporter's words turn into total gibberish. That's exactly what happened during a CBS Los Angeles broadcast from the 2011 Grammy Awards. Viewers were stunned when reporter Serene Branson went from speaking normally to uttering a string of nonsensical sounds on live TV.
Well, a very, very heavy debatation tonight. We had a very Darrison.
She visibly panicked as she realized something was wrong, leading many to fear that she was having a stroke on air. Paramedics rushed to examine her, and thankfully, her vital signs were normal. It turned out Serene had suffered a complex migraine that mimicked stroke-like symptoms, causing sudden aphasia or speech impairment. In other words, her brain glitched, scrambling her speech. The clip went viral as a real-life Matrix moment, a healthy young reporter seemingly malfunctioning without warning. It was a scary sight, but also a relief when we learned it wasn't a true stroke. Still, for a few seconds of live TV, it felt like reality itself had briefly broken down. A famous weatherman suddenly freezes like an NPC caught in lag. On the Today Show in 2012, co-hosts Savannah Guthrie and Matt Lauer finished a silly dance joking about leaving room for the Holy Ghost between dance partners. That's when Al Roker, the beloved NBC weatherman, did the unthinkable. He stared directly into the camera, motionless with a goofy grin for a full 17 seconds. He didn't blink, didn't move a muscle. It was as if someone hit the pause button on Al Roker. Roker later explained that it was a bit of deadpan humor, essentially a brain freeze challenge he did on purpose. The show's director egged him on to see how long he could hold the pose, and Al committed to the bit. Even so, watching it back, many viewers felt a chill. The moment looked so uncanny that it's now a classic glitch in the Matrix clip. During a live soccer match, a shadow person sprinted through the stands, and no one can agree if it was a glitch, a ghost, or just a camera trick. This incident happened at a stadium in La Paz, Bolivia, during a Fox Sports broadcast in 2014. In the footage, you see a dark, human-shaped figure running rapidly across the lower tier seats straight through the crowd, yet no one in the audience seems to react to it. Viewers at home were creeped out. Was it a ghost caught on live TV? Rational explanations soon emerged. Lighting snafu or video artifact, basically a technical glitch that made a real person's image smear across the screen. But that hasn't stopped wild theories. The clip went viral, with some saying the stadium is haunted or that we witnessed a Matrix running program acting up. What's freakier than one person glitching? How about two people glitching together? Twin sisters Paula and Bridget Powers from Australia gave an interview that left viewers' jaws on the floor. They were recounting a dramatic carjacking incident involving their mother, but it wasn't the story that stole the show, it was how they told it. The twins spoke in a mesmerizing stereo, often saying the exact same words at the exact same time during the live interview.
So we drop everything and we went running out the front. We seen Mum running out from the house up there.
At times, one twin would start a sentence and the other would finish it in perfect sync, as if they shared one mind. The effect was so uncanny that the clip went viral worldwide, and even Jimmy Kimmel invited them on his show out of sheer fascination. The sisters themselves just laughed it off, saying their brains think alike at the same time after a lifetime together. Indeed, Paula and Bridget have spent 51 years dressing alike, working together, and practically living in parallel. So while it seems paranormal, it's likely just an extraordinary sibling bond. Viewers thought they spotted a shape-shifting reptilian on the news, but the truth was more technological. In an old CTV news clip that resurfaced online, a female reporter delivers the headlines when suddenly her eyes appear to glitch. During a blink, her eyes don't look human for a split second, they seem fixed and glazed over, almost like a doll's. or a computer-rendered image. Experts explained that it was a rolling screen repaint artifact from the broadcast. Basically, this was an analog TV signal glitch. On old antenna TV, if the signal degrades at the wrong moment, in this case when she blinked, part of the previous frame's data can briefly hold on for a second. The result? Her eyes open from a prior frame overlaid on her face while blinking, creating a creepy illusion that her eyes blinked but didn't close? Technical or not, it looked really freaky, like an NPC in a video game failing to load its textures. Even after hearing the explanation, some joked, "Sure, that's what they want you to believe." This one isn't a glitch in the video, it's a glitch in the broadcast itself, and it's straight up like something out of a techno thriller. In November 1987, Chicago sportscaster Dan Roan was doing the nightly news when suddenly the signal hijacked. TV screens went black for a second, and then viewers were suddenly staring at a bizarre figure. Someone in a Max Headroom mask bobbing around in front of a swiveling metal background. No sound, just 30 seconds of this super creepy masked intruder. Engineers managed to regain control on that channel, but it wasn't over. About 2 hours later, during a Doctor Who episode on another station, Max Headroom hacker struck again, this time with audio. The masked person spoke in distorted garbles, laughed, moaned, even exposed their bare behind to the camera while being spanked with a fly swatter. Yeah, it was really weird. After about 90 seconds, the pirate broadcast ended. Viewers and station officials were completely baffled. Who was that? How did they break into major TV station signals? The Federal Communications Commission launched an investigation, but to this day, the culprits have still never been caught or identified. Even decades later, watching the Max Headroom incident on YouTube will give you a serious case of the heebie-jeebies. Somebody has the chance to have the best deathbed confession of all time. Imagine your grandfather, you're saying your final goodbyes, and he's like, "I was Max Headroom." That would be crazy. When a news crew went looking for ghost stories, they might have gotten more than they bargained for. In 2021, WNYT News Channel 13 in upstate New York did a live report from the Greenridge Cemetery as part of a Halloween segment. Reporter Sam Hessler was on air in the pre-dawn hours, walking among the tombstones while a guide shared spooky historical tales. The broadcast went smoothly until viewers at home noticed something on their screens that even the crew on site missed. In the background, behind Sam, a misty white figure seemed to drift between the graves. It was brief and subtle, a flicker of what looked like a person or a fog moving fast. After the live shot, one astonished viewer alerted the station, and Sam herself was stunned reviewing the footage. She hadn't seen anything in person. WNYT later acknowledged the eerie moment, assuring folks the clip was unedited and truly aired live. The internet, of course, lit up with ghost caught on live TV posts and theories. Some paranormal enthusiasts called it one of the best accidental ghost sightings on a news broadcast, evidence of a spirit roaming the cemetery. Skeptics countered that it could have been a camera glitch, a passing car's headlights reflecting, or even a stray piece of insect or dust close to the lens creating a blur. The station's own write-up teased it as something almost too crazy to be real and encouraged viewers to watch and decide for themselves. You're watching HGTV and suddenly an emergency alert pops up warning that the end of the world is here. What do? That nightmare scenario actually happened to some TV viewers in Southern California in September 2017. Without warning, regular programming was interrupted by the emergency alert system. The typical alert banner scrolled, but then things got truly terrifying. A booming male voice came on and proclaimed, "Realize this, that in the last days extremely violent times will come." Imagine hearing that out of the blue on a Thursday morning and you're just trying to love it or list it. Understandably, people freaked out. It sounded like a prophecy of an imminent apocalypse or some wartime broadcast. As dramatic as it was, this turned out not to be the work of pranksters or an alien overlord, but simply a technical glitch and incredibly bad timing, during a routine test of the emergency alert system. In short, the system glitched out and aired a fire and brimstone sermon by mistake. Cox and Spectrum cable customers heard what sounded like a doomsday warning, but it was just Pastor Chuck Swindoll quoting the Bible, 2 Timothy 3:1, on an FM station. Both the cable company and the FCC confirmed it was an error, not a hack, but not before scaring the heck out of viewers. In the middle of a live US Congress debate, viewers suddenly saw something Russian. In January 2017, politics junkies watching a C-SPAN online feed got a strange surprise. The feed, which was showing a live House of Representatives session, abruptly switched to Russia Today, the Kremlin-funded news channel, for about 10 minutes. Given that this occurred amid intense news about Russian cyber interference, many thought C-SPAN had been hacked by Russians in real time. C-SPAN quickly investigated and put out a statement. They didn't believe it was a hack, but rather a routing technical error. The leading theory is that some glitch caused the RT feed to literally overlap and replace the C-SPAN feed on their site. In simulation terms, it's like two different programs momentarily cross-wired. The timing, however, was almost comical. It happened just hours after a power outage oddly halted a Senate hearing about Russian hacking. Even Waters, whose speech was interrupted, remarked on the curious timing and demanded a clear explanation. Seeing Moscow news pop up in a US government broadcast felt like a scene from a spy movie, or a reminder that the simulation has a twisted sense of humor. Our final glitch was literally one word caught in an endless loop, and of course, that word was Russia. Also in January 2017, I guess a bad month for TV gremlins, MSNBC's show Hardball experienced a freaky moment. Journalist Dave Ignatius was talking to host Chris Matthews about, ironically, Russian interference in US politics. He said the word Russia and bang. The screen flickered and started repeating Russia, Russia, Russia over and over in a feedback loop. Chris Matthews looked confused as the glitch kept going for several seconds, echoing Russia in a creepy cadence until the control room cut to commercial. Given the climate at the time, Twitter exploded with jokes that Moscow hackers or the Kremlin Matrix had struck again, but most likely this was just a bizarre technical malfunction. Perhaps a failing satellite feed or encoding error that caused a few seconds of audio/video to loop. The fact it looped that particular word on that particular topic, well, that was gold for conspiracy lovers and also late night comedians. MSNBC assured it wasn't intentional and nothing nefarious was found. If we do live in a simulation, it definitely has a flair for dramatic irony.
Alright, if this first case doesn't make you question reality just a bit, then I'm not sure what will. Anthony Hopkins had just landed the leading role in the movie adaptation The Girl from Petrovka by George Pfeiffer. Wanting to start research and familiarize himself with the character, he did what any good actor would do and decided to read the damn book. He went to London and sifted through a number of bookstores, but none of them had the novel he was looking for. Eventually, Hopkins decided he had to just head back home, but while waiting at a subway station, he happened to spot a book on a bench. Curious, he picked it up and was thrilled to realize that it was a copy of The Girl from Petrovka. I mean, what are the chances of that? Inside the book were a bunch of scribbled notes, but that was fine, it would have to do. Well, 2 years later, Hopkins was filming in Vienna, and the book's author, George Pfeiffer, visited the set one day. Hopkins struck up a conversation with Pfeiffer, who ended up telling the actor that he'd lost his own copy of his book, having given it to a friend who'd lost it somewhere in London. Hopkins was stunned to realize that the book he'd found in the London subway was the author's very own copy, filled with his handwritten notes.
Next up, we have the historic fact that it's not actually possible to prove that we are not, in fact, living in a simulation. While nuclear physicist Zora Davuti claims that we must not be living in a simulation because if we were, cosmic rays, highly energetic particles traveling through space at a speed approaching light speed, would appear as pixels rather than unbending beams. But this theory is quickly undermined when you take the words of NYU philosopher David Chalmers into account, who said that you're not going to get proof that we're not in a simulation because any evidence that we are not could be simulated. It's a paradox. But it doesn't end there. If you want to take the scientific route to disprove Davuti's definitive claim rather than the philosophical one, you can do that too. Because apparently we have already determined our universe's pixel size, and it's a Planck length, spelled Planck, which is 10 to the power of -20 times the size of a proton. It's really small. And it's also the point at which concepts of time and gravity no longer apply, which leads us to the conclusion that if the world is in fact a simulation, it is made up of a countless number of Planck-length pixels. Forget 4K, we're living in 400.
Operation Paul Bunyan, another story that sounds like something out of a cartoon rather than a true event from history. Back in 1976, North Korea and the United States both had troops stationed in the Korean Demilitarized Zone, separating North and South Korea. On August 18th of that year, a group of American soldiers went to trim a tree in the DMZ. This tree was blocking the view from a United Nations command checkpoint, and the soldiers wanted to improve visibility. But as they started trimming, North Korean soldiers confronted them and brutally attacked, killing 2 American officers with axes. So the US carried out a mission named after a legendary lumberjack, Paul Bunyan. On August 21st, 3 days after the attack, the US and South Korean forces sent a convoy of military vehicles into the DMZ, packed with armed soldiers. Overhead there were fighter jets and attack helicopters, heavy artillery was close by as well, and what were they going to do? Well, they were there to obliterate that tree. It was an over-the-top display of military might. The US troops cut down the tree, and then they calmly packed up and left. It sent a clear message that they had the power to respond with violence, but they were avoiding escalation at the same time. It sounds pretty ridiculous when you first describe it, but it actually does make a lot of sense.
Next up, we have the old Russian doll simulation theory, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. A simulation inside a simulation inside a simulation, and so on and so forth. The theory comes from Nick Bostrom's simulation hypothesis, which basically states that if humanity is around long enough to create convincing reality simulation technology, and if their simulated reality is around long enough to create their own convincing simulations of reality, they will. If this is truly the case, there would be countless simulated realities with only one existing base reality, making the idea of us living inside of a simulation a probability equation with a solution that states that the odds of us living inside a simulation are far more likely than the odds of us being the base reality. Not only that, but it's also highly likely that the reality that created us isn't the base reality either. We might simply just be a product of a product of a product of a product. You get the point.
So here's another historical fact that just doesn't sound real. The war on Neptune. And Neptune is not an allegory here, this was a literal war on the god of the sea. The Roman Emperor Caligula is often thought of as pretty mad. He was known for some very unpredictable behavior and wild antics, and this is a perfect example of that. He declared war on Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. He ordered his soldiers to go to the coast and collect seashells as spoils of war. That's how he intended to show Neptune who was boss. Some say he even had the soldiers slash at waves with their swords. So why the hell did he do this? Some historians think it was just a way for him to show off his military power. He was known to make some pretty grandiose gestures, and declaring war on a god fit right into his eccentric and unpredictable style.
Next up, we've got some quirky code, or should I say some computer code in our quarks. For those of you who don't know what quarks are, they're a type of elementary particle that are absolutely fundamental to the existence of matter. Matter being pretty much anything that exists in this universe other than light, sound, heat, energy, gravity, and time. So yeah, quarks are pretty important, especially to theoretical physicist James Gates, who claims to have found literal computer code embedded in equations relating to string theory. String theory being an incredibly complicated scientific theory that I will now attempt to explain to you in just a few short sentences. Basically, string theory says that absolutely everything in this universe is connected, and that the universe is made up of and connected by tiny vibrating strings that are smaller than the smallest subatomic particles, which are really small and include quarks. Now, back to how this all proves simulation theory. While studying an equation about quarks, electrons, and supersymmetry, Gates discovered a computer code embedded in the mathematical equation, but not just any computer code. He discovered an error correcting code, the same code that is used to make web browsers work. I'll say it again, the same code used to make web browsers work was discovered in an equation pertaining to the literal building blocks of our universe. If that doesn't get you thinking, I throw my hands up. I really don't know what will.
Alright, Mark Twain, the famous author of classics like The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn, he made a really eerie prediction about his very own death. It's one of those stories that makes you wonder if there's certain things about reality that science just doesn't fully understand. Twain was born in 1835. That same year, Halley's Comet, which only comes around once every 76 years, made an appearance in the sky. Twain thought that this was pretty significant. He was so struck by the timing that he made a bold prediction later in his life. He said, "I came in with Halley's Comet. It is coming again next year. The Almighty has said, no doubt. Now there are these two unaccountable freaks. They came in together. They must go out together." And he really did seem genuinely convinced that his life was somehow connected to the comet. You could even say the two were intertwined. Well, he ended up being right. Halley's Comet came back in 1910, and Twain died on April 21st, just one day after the comet's closest approach to Earth. April 21st, also my birthday.
Next up, let's take a short break from breaking our brains with complicated theories, philosophical prompts, and math, and instead break our brains with something else. Pictures, like this one of two benches, a clear example of a simulation glitch, copy and pasting code. Not convinced? How about these guys? Or these ladies? Or these two cars that clearly shouldn't both exist, why are they parked next to each other? Or this copy and pasted cat. Or how about this glitch? These photos were taken just moments apart, but something is very different about them. If you look closely, you will notice that in the first photograph, the little girl is missing maybe 2 teeth on the bottom row of her mouth. Now look at the next photo. All of a sudden, her bottom teeth have reappeared, and now her top ones are missing. It's just too weird. Honestly, it might hurt your brain less just to chalk it up to computer error. I don't know. Let's move on. James?
All those images reminded me of a time I'd come out of a Jackasters with my cousin, and we were walking through the parking lot, and all of the cars were white. Like literally every second, it was like, holy crap. It was like one of those times in a video game where it seems like things just haven't rendered fully yet. It was weird. Next, I want to talk about the dancing plague of 1518, which I know has been talked about to death, but could this unexplained event in history actually be an example of a glitch in the Matrix? I mean, it's talked about a lot for a reason. It's one of the strangest and most mysterious incidents in history. For the few of you who are unfamiliar though, in July of 1518 in France, a woman stepped into the street and started dancing. And dancing and dancing, she just kept going. It went from strange but kind of endearing to a bit concerning. Hours then turned into days, and even more strangely, others started joining in. Within a week, dozens of people were dancing in the streets. They danced day and night without rest or food. Some danced until they collapsed from exhaustion, and horrifyingly, the dancers looked terrified. It was like they were being controlled like puppets by some unseen force, and the dancing spread. More and more people started joining in, seemingly unable to control their movements. Eventually, after several weeks of this, the dancing stopped, as mysteriously as it began. Those who survived were left in shock. and were confused. They had no clear explanation for why they'd started dancing.
And finally, we have the fact that in 2017, a multidisciplinary group of researchers working at the University of Washington proved that computer code could literally be embedded into a person's physical strands of DNA, which obviously has led to a crap ton of people seriously questioning whether or not what we perceive as biological reality has been just computer code all along. The technology is incredibly advanced, so advanced that it is likely that in the next decade we could see coding DNA becoming a common global practice. What implications does this have in regard to simulation theory? Well, perhaps the reason that we were able to embed code into and alter the code of our DNA in the first place is because it was already code in the first place.
The tectonic strain theory suggests that before an earthquake, stress builds up in the Earth's crust and releases low-frequency electromagnetic waves. And there's this idea that these EM waves can interfere with the human nervous system, causing hallucinations, nausea, and feelings of dread. In some places, people report glowing lights in the sky or buzzing sounds, ghost-like visions, often just days or even hours before a quake. This becomes especially interesting when you look at reports of paranormal activity clustered along fault lines. The idea is that what people interpret as a supernatural thing might actually be a side effect of EM energy hitting their brains in just the right way. Researchers like Michael Persinger have tried to replicate these effects in a lab using electromagnetic stimulation to induce hallucinations and feelings of a presence in volunteers. But how does this connect to reality being a simulation? Well, if our brains can be manipulated this easily, it does raise the question, how stable is our perception of reality at all? If tectonic strain can change what we see or feel, then reality might be less solid than we think, and more like code reacting to pressure. There's a group of scientists who've been running a weird experiment for years. They set up a bunch of machines all over the world called random number generators, basically devices that spit out completely random strings of numbers. But during major world events like terror attacks or big natural disasters, they found that patterns tend to show up in the number generators. They start acting less random. Now, is this just a coincidence, or, in theory, could our collective emotions somehow be influencing the numbers? Statistically, this shouldn't happen, but it keeps happening. Enough that it's made a bunch of researchers seriously wonder if human consciousness could have an effect on physical systems. So what does this mean? Well, if the world around us really is a simulation, this phenomenon could make sense. Often in games or programs, when too many users interact at once, the system can glitch or lag. Maybe when billions of people are emotionally focused on the same thing, it's messing with the simulation's background processes. Reality itself could start to wobble a little, and those numbers that are supposed to be randomly spat out could start showing patterns. There's this shortwave radio signal people have been hearing on and off since the late 90s. Nobody knows where it's coming from, and it doesn't send voices, numbers, or anything you can actually decode. It just plays weird, distorted tones that sound almost like music in reverse, or like someone messing with a cassette tape. Take a listen. This is why people started calling it the backwards music station. It doesn't have a schedule, a name, or any kind of pattern. It'll just suddenly start broadcasting for hours, then vanish again. What's strange is that it shows up on frequencies close to those old numbers stations from the Cold War, the ones spies used to get coded instructions. But this one doesn't seem to be trying to say anything. There's no rhythm, no breaks, no ID. Some radio hobbyists think it might be some kind of military tech bleeding through, like signals meant for submarines or secret communications systems. Others think it could be a data signal, but in a format that nobody recognizes. But if the world really is a simulation, maybe it's not meant for anyone at all. Maybe it's part of the system itself, some leftover noise leaking into our reality. So here's something NASA still can't explain. When certain spacecraft fly past Earth to gain speed, what's called a gravity assist, they sometimes come out of the maneuver going just a little bit faster or slower than expected. Not by much, just a few millimeters per second, but in space, that's a big deal, and nobody knows why it happens. But it's happened to multiple probes over the years, Galileo, NEAR, Rosetta, and others. The math is solid going in, but after the flyby, they check the data and they're like, what? That shouldn't have happened. Even after ruling out stuff like equipment error. Now, in a simulated world, this makes a strange kind of sense. Maybe the flyby is forcing the physics engine to recalculate on the fly, and it doesn't always do it perfectly. Like a video game that lags when a player moves too fast past a boundary. The laws stay consistent until something brushes up against the edge of the system. Sometimes people dream about places they've never been, only to later stumble across them in real life. This sounds kind of made up, but one of the most widely discussed cases comes from a man named Chris Robinson, sometimes referred to as the Dream Detective. He claims to have had precognitive dreams that helped him find real-world locations, ones he'd never visited in real life before. In one case, he dreamed about a strange courtyard with archways, a fountain, and specific stonework. Later, while traveling in Italy, he walked into a courtyard that perfectly matched his dream, down to the placement of objects. He insists he'd never seen it before, not even in a photo or a movie. Of course, there are plenty of skeptics and possible logical explanations, but it is interesting. I mean, so many of us have had experiences like this, specific things happening in dreams that eerily play out in real life. Are we just pulling from subconscious memories, or are we tapping into something deeper, like data bleeding from one layer of a simulation into another? The double slit experiment. This one's famous for a reason. It messes with the very idea of reality. Here's my attempt to explain it. So you fire tiny particles like electrons or photons at a barrier with two slits, and then watch what hits the wall behind it. If you don't measure which slit the particles go through, it behaves like a wave interfering with itself, creating this striped pattern like ripples in water. But the second you observe it, even passively, it snaps back to behaving like a solid particle, and the interference pattern vanishes. To put it simply, when you watch what happens, it changes the outcome. That shouldn't really happen. Nothing in normal physics says a particle should care or behave any differently just because it's being watched, but yet, somehow, this happens. In a simulated world, though, this is exactly what you'd expect. Think about how video games work. The game doesn't fully render areas the player isn't looking at. It saves processing power. Now, imagine reality does the same thing. Until something is observed, it stays in a kind of maybe state. But once you look, the simulation decides what it should be. There's a theory called biocentrism, and it flips everything we thought we knew about reality on its head. Instead of life being a byproduct of the universe, it says that the universe exists because of life. In other words, without consciousness, there's no reality. It sounds like stoner philosophy, but this was actually proposed by scientist Dr. Robert Lanza, and when you look at how quantum physics behaves, it kind of makes sense. This kind of connects to the double slit experiment that we just talked about. The second you measure or observe a particle, it changes just by looking at it. Biocentrism says our consciousness isn't stuck inside the universe, it's actually shaping it, like your awareness is writing the code as you go. If that's true, then maybe everything you see around you, time, space, matter, it only exists because you're here to witness it, as if the simulation doesn't run until a player logs in. Let's talk about the smallest thing in the universe, like the absolute tiniest. It's called the Planck length, about 100 millionth of a trillionth of a centimeter. So small, it's basically nothing. According to physics, you can't look any smaller than this. Try to zoom in past it and the math just breaks. Reality gets fuzzy, like a pixelated image that you just zoomed too far in. Now ask yourself, why would reality need to have a smallest possible unit at all? If the universe was truly infinite, there'd be no reason for this lower limit. But if it's running on some kind of engine, if this is all just a simulation, then there has to be a smallest building block. You can't render infinity. Things like the speed of light, gravity, and Planck's constant all tie into this, just like how game developers limit how far you can zoom in or how fast you can move to keep the whole thing from falling apart. So if there's a smallest pixel of space and time, Could it mean that we're inside something artificial? If you take a step back and really look at the world, it becomes obvious something weird is going on with the math. Patterns are everywhere. Spiral galaxies, sunflowers, hurricane formations, seashells. All of them follow the Fibonacci sequence, a series of numbers that pop up again and again in nature. The golden ratio shows up in everything from the shape of your face to the structure of galaxies. Then there's fractals, patterns that repeat themselves no matter how far you zoom in or out. Trees, rivers, lightning, lungs, all following mathematical blueprints. Nature is ruled by math, and that's kind of strange because if the universe is random and chaotic, why does it keep producing neat, repeating formulas? If everything works like code, maybe it's because it is code. Video games, everything from movement to rendering to environment is built on math. And maybe the real world is no different. What we're seeing as natural beauty could just be the visual expression code. Time isn't as solid as you think. In fact, it bends. That's what Einstein's theory of relativity says, and we've proven it. If you go fast enough or sit in a strong enough gravitational field, time literally ticks slower for you. This isn't science fiction. Astronauts living on the International Space Station age slightly slower than we do here on Earth. GPS satellites wouldn't even work if they didn't account for time dilation, so time moves differently depending on where you are and how fast you're going. Almost like the system is prioritizing certain areas over others. Sound familiar? It should. A game engine puts most of its power into rendering what's right in front of the player. The stuff in the distance, lower quality, slower loading. Maybe not even there until you get closer. Could our universe be doing the same thing? Maybe reality runs faster in some places and slows down in others to save on processing.
Lake Vostok is a weird one. It's this massive freshwater lake that's been trapped beneath Antarctica's ice for millions of years. Scientists first found it in the 70s, but it's believed to have been sealed off by 3 kilometers or about 2 miles of ice for around 15 million years. At one point, Lake Vostok was pretty much a regular lake on the surface of Antarctica, and it would rise and fall with the tides, just like any other body of water. But now, it's deep beneath the ice with a crazy amount of pressure, about 5,150 pounds per square inch, just sitting there in total darkness. Even though it's buried under all that ice, scientists are convinced that there's life down there. They think organisms have been evolving in complete isolation, untouched by the outside world for all of this time. How they're still thriving in that dark, high-pressure environment is a mystery, and while it'd be wild to see what the lake would have looked like in the past, I'm also dying to know what kind of weird life forms could be living down there right now. Socotra Island is one of the strangest places on Earth. It's found off the coast of Yemen, and it doesn't look like any place on the planet. The island is very remote, and because of that, it's home to some very strange stuff. About a third of its plant life can't be found anywhere else in the world. One of the most bizarre plants is the dragon's blood tree. It's got these branches that look upside down, kind of like a tree, but growing with its roots sticking out of the ground and at the top. These trees have been used for medicinal purposes, dyeing fabric, making incense, and staining wood. And then there's the island's bottle tree, which has a thick trunk that stores water to survive the harsh conditions. You'll also find huge limestone caves here filled with bats, and you'll also find messages carved into the walls by sailors from 1 to 6 CE. The people who live here are also pretty unique, with genetic traits that can't be found anywhere else on the planet. In North Carolina, there is a spot known as the Devil's Stomping Ground. It's this barren 40-foot wide circle in the middle of the woods, and a lot of very weird stuff is said to go on here. The legend goes that the devil himself stomps around in this circle every night before heading off to do his evil deeds. The ground inside the circle is weirdly barren. There's no plants. No plants will grow there, and anything left inside the circle during the day will mysteriously be thrown out by the next morning. People have tried to spend the night in the circle as well, but many say it feels off. Scientists aren't sure what's going on, but there's been some speculation about the soil's copper or salt content causing the plants to die, but testing hasn't really given any clear answers here. What's also incredibly strange is that compasses seem to go haywire when you're standing in the circle. There's a noticeable magnetic interference. If you look at maps from the 1700s, you'll see an island called Bermeja off the coast of Mexico. It was shown as a key piece of land for Mexico's territorial claims, especially when it came to oil drilling in the Gulf of Mexico. Well, look at a map today, and you won't be able to find the place. The island just doesn't seem to exist anymore. In 2009, a study by the National Autonomous University of Mexico tried to find it using everything from aerial reconnaissance to underwater sensors, but they couldn't locate the island anywhere. It was supposed to be about 55 nautical miles outside Mexico's territorial waters, which would have given them a big chunk of extra oil-rich land, but it wasn't there. Your first thought is that the island was probably just swallowed up by the sea, but others believe the island's disappearance might have been something more intentional, like maybe it was bombed by the US to limit Mexico's claims on the Gulf. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories surrounding it, but till this day, we still don't know for sure. Minnesota is home to one of the most bizarre waterfalls in the United States, Devil's Kettle Falls. The Brule River splits into two channels, one of which continues on as a regular waterfall, but the other one, well, the second stream disappears into this giant pothole known as the Devil's Kettle, and no one knows where the water goes. It just vanishes without a trace. Some say it's bottomless, and that the water drops all the way down into hell, and while it's a fun theory, scientists, of course, don't think that. They think the water might actually flow underground, rejoining the Brule River a little further downstream, but it's impossible to see with the naked eye. The thing is, no one's been able to prove where that water actually goes, and after decades of research, the Devil's Kettle is still just a weird little oddity we don't fully understand, which obviously means our entire reality may be just a simulation. Of course. Herkimer is a small town in Iowa which supposedly vanished into thin air in 1928. The weirdness started when a guy posted about it online in 2015, saying that his mom got an email with a history of the town. Turns out it was a normal little town back in the day, but by the time aerial photos were taken in 1928, there was nothing but empty fields where Herkimer used to be. Now at first it seemed like a weird coincidence, but things only got stranger. There's a story about a tourist who drove through, got his gas topped off at the local station, then found his tank empty just a couple miles later. He was very confused but figured there was probably something wrong with his car. Anyway, he'd have to turn around and walk back to the town for help. But no matter how far he walked back, the town never got any closer. Eventually, the man was picked up by another driver along the road, but was so disturbed by what had happened that he eventually ended up in a sanitarium. Another strange thing happened when two men from Illinois tried to buy supplies in the town. They couldn't walk up the steps of the general store because their feet just kept passing through them, like the steps weren't even there. Others tried and the same thing happened. Not long after, the local police arrived to investigate, only to find their hands passed through the doors. It was like the town was just this one big mirage, and eventually there was no sign of the town at all. The Gurdon Light in Arkansas has been a local mystery for decades. It's one of those things you can't really explain no matter how hard you try. It's a glowing light, usually white, blue, or sometimes orange, that floats near the railroad tracks in Gurdon. Unlike other mysterious lights, this one's been seen by so many people that's become a part of the town's history. The light shows up pretty regularly as well, and some folks have even seen it so often that it's just become another odd feature of the landscape. There are a couple of theories behind it. Some say it's the ghost of a railroad worker who was decapitated by a train, and his lantern's still floating around as he looks for his head. Another version of the tale goes that a railroad foreman was killed by one of his workers, and again his spirit still lurks around the tracks with his lantern, creating the spooky light. Leaving aside ghosts though, there's a theory that the light could be caused by underground quartz crystals, creating some sort of electrical reaction. But whatever the cause, the Gurdon Light makes for one of the strangest mysteries in the state, along with how Arkansas is spelled. Still don't get that. The Nevada Triangle, similar to the Bermuda Triangle, is a stretch of land that just seems to suck planes out of the sky. It's found close to Area 51, and over 2,000 planes have gone missing in the region, a lot of them without a trace. One of the most famous disappearances is that of billionaire pilot Steve Fawcett in 2007. He was a super experienced pilot, but his plane vanished without a word, and it took a whole year to find the wreckage. Another story involves a military pilot who crashed in 1957, survived for nearly 2 months, and then appeared out of nowhere in a national park. Theories range from natural stuff like mountain waves messing with the planes to wilder ideas like aliens. The 2011 tsunami in Japan was one of the most devastating natural disasters ever, leaving nearly 16,000 people dead and over 2,500 missing. But what came after was stranger. In the months and years that have followed the disaster, there have been reports of ghost sightings. People would see spirits wandering the streets, asking for directions or looking for their lost homes. Some taxi drivers would also report picking up ghost passengers, people who seemed completely normal at first, but would then vanish out of the back seat before ever arriving at their destination. There were also stories of people being possessed by these lost souls, leading Buddhist monks stepping up to perform hundreds of exorcisms. Now, the Bermuda Triangle. It is the OG of mysterious patches of the planet. It's that stretch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico where planes and ships seem to disappear without a trace. There are all kinds of stories, some of ships vanishing with no sign, others of pilots flying into it and just losing contact. Theories for the disappearances range from the scientific, like massive underwater gas bubbles or magnetic anomalies messing with instruments, pure coincidence, to the more outlandish, like alien abductions, time warps, or in this case, glitches in the matrix that is our reality. One of the most famous cases is the disappearance of Flight 19, a group of 5 US Navy bombers that went missing in 1945 during a training mission. A rescue plane sent after them also disappeared. Despite all the theories and investigations, no one has been able to come up with a solid answer for why these disappearances happen, and that's why the Bermuda Triangle has to be at the top of this list. Neil deGrasse Tyson, one of the most charismatic scientists since Bill Nye. He thinks that there's a very good chance we could be living in a simulation. In fact, he thinks it's about a 50-50 chance. All of this could be one big simulation sitting on someone's hard drive. When Tyson was asked about us possibly living in a simulation of some kind, he said, quote, "I think the likelihood may be very high." Then he noted the massive gap between human and chimpanzee intelligence, despite how much DNA we share with each other. 98%, just so you know. So in the vastness of space, there could be some other beings far, far more superior to us in every conceivable way. Tyson went on to say we would be drooling, blithering idiots in their presence. If that's the case, it is easy for me to imagine that everything in our lives is just a creation of some other entity for their entertainment. A lot of the popularity about the whole "are we living in a simulation" thing came not only from the Matrix, of course, but from Nick Bostrom, a philosopher at the University of Oxford in 2003. He came out with a theory that what we perceive as reality might actually be a sophisticated computer simulation created by an advanced civilization. He based his theory on 3 possibilities, one of which must be true. Either human civilizations never reach a stage where they can create such simulations because they either go extinct or choose not to. Advanced civilizations are not interested in creating simulations of their ancestors' lives. And the third is that we are almost certainly living in a simulation. See, Bostrom argues that if the first 2 options are not true, then the third must be. Because if any advanced civilizations are capable of creating simulations and are interested in doing so, the number of simulated realities would far outnumber the one originally created. So the probability that we are living in the real world is very low. To make it simpler, think about it like this. Let's say you have one real world and millions of simulated ones. If you randomly found yourself in one of these worlds, the chances are incredibly high that you're in one of the simulations rather than the one real world. People often liken this idea to video games. Just as characters in a game might believe their world is real, Bostrom suggests that our reality could be created by beings with technology far beyond our own, and we wouldn't necessarily know it. Next up, we have Elon Musk,
A man so incredibly smart, yet so incredibly dumb at the same time. It's weird. Anyway, we're not here to talk about Elon Musk himself really, but his theory on a simulated world. Let's get into that. The CEO of SpaceX and Tesla himself really believes that we are indeed living in a simulation. He's talked about this on the Joe Rogan podcast and press conferences, and unlike the other folks on this list who just theorize about it and think it could be a possibility, Musk is like 99.9% sure, stating that there's a quote 1 in a billion chance we're in based reality. So, just a little less on the fence than Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example. Max Tegmark is a physicist at MIT who's written a couple papers on simulation theory, one in 2014 entitled Is the Universe a Simulation? And another that came out just a couple years ago called Detecting Structures in Universe Simulations, which he wrote along with postdoctoral researcher at the University of Copenhagen, Hans Olaf Kold. Max Tegmark believes that our universe can all be broken down mathematically, and that even reality itself is part of a mathematical structure. Now, he outlined this in his 2014 book, Our Mathematical Universe. So Tegmark thinks that these mathematical structures could essentially be similar to the type of code we see used in, say, video games. A simulation. In Tegmark's own words, if I were a character in a computer game, I would also discover eventually that the rules seemed completely rigid and mathematical. Next up we have James Gates, who spoke at the Isaac Asimov Memorial Debate along with Max Tegmark, Neil deGrasse Tyson, and others. Gates is a theoretical physicist at the University of Maryland, and he made similar discoveries as Max Tegmark did. He stated, I was driven to error-correcting codes. They're what make browsers work. So why were they in the equations I was studying about quarks and electrons and supersymmetry? This brought me to the stark realization that I could no longer say people like Max are crazy. So we've discussed a lot of theories and stuff from scientists, but how about strange first-hand experiences? This story comes to us from Reddit user JenL729. When I was about 4 or 5 years old, my father's uncle passed away. My father was going to the wake, but my mother was working, so he needed to bring me with him. I had never been to a wake or a funeral before, and I do believe this was my first ever experience with death. We arrived at the funeral home and I followed him through the procession of family members. Then we approached the open casket. I don't recall being afraid. Curious and bewildered would be better terms to describe the feelings, I think. I do know that there was absolutely no sense of fear at that point. We stepped away from the casket and I stood by my father as he chatted with family members. I needed to use the restroom, and it was just around the corner, so he told me to go and come right back. I turned to the corner, used the restroom/sink, then exited the bathroom. When I came out and turned the corner, the room was empty and there was no casket. My father was gone, and so were all the other people that were there only a moment ago. I fearfully began wandering around the funeral home, but not a person could be found. The entire building was silent and empty. Finally, as I neared the front entrance of the building and was going to step outside, an employee approached me from the alcove on the right where they kept the coats to see if I was okay. I don't remember any of the conversation, but they turned me around and directed me back to the bathroom. When I came out of the bathroom, everything had returned to normal. Now, that person was very young. It's a very old memory they had, so finicky, but interesting story. So, is there any way to actually test whether or not we're living in a simulation? Well, not at the moment, but there are a team of scientists led by Martin Savage that have been working on it, and he believes that one day computers will be advanced enough to determine it. Martin Savage and his team had been attempting to actually simulate a universe inside a computer. Now, that hasn't been accomplished yet, but it could be a possibility in the future. Martin J. Savage is a physics professor at the University of Washington who thinks our universe might be a giant computer simulation run by our ancestors. He and his colleagues started looking for specific patterns in the universe that also appear in smaller computer simulations we create today. One pattern he used as an example is the limitations in the energy of cosmic rays. If our universe were a simulation, these cosmic rays might not behave as expected because of the resource constraints of whatever's running the simulation. That one's hard to wrap your head around. But this next glitch in the Matrix story comes to us from Reddit user JBBJ84 and goes as follows. The one thing that has continued to make me question my reality is a dream I had back in 8th grade about my girlfriend who was going to break up with me. I dreamt that she was sitting in a room with her best friend discussing whether she would break up with me or not. I distinctly remember the point she made about being too young and whatever. It was a long time ago, but I do remember that after waking up from that dream, the reasons she had for breaking up with me were ingrained in my brain. For some reason, when I woke up after this dream, I had a weird feeling that I was gonna receive some bad news. Lo and behold, I checked my phone and there's a massive text message from my then girlfriend explaining why we should break up, with the exact same reasoning as I witnessed in the dream I had. Even weirder is that I found out the friend I had seen in my dream was actually with my ex when she sent the message. It was the weirdest effing thing I've ever experienced. It was completely out of the blue and I didn't expect the breakup text at all before the dream. Now, after I've read about simulation theory, the thought can't stop popping into my mind that somehow I was able to visualize the next part of this game tree, that I unexpectedly was able to view what was going to happen next. It still bugs me today and gives me existential anxiety because I still don't have a plausible explanation as to why I had such a specific dream that actually ended up coming true. David Chalmers is a well-known philosopher who focuses on the nature of consciousness, looking into why and how physical processes in the brain give us the feeling of being conscious. Chalmers is also interested in the idea that we might be living in a computer simulation. Now, Chalmers really makes the whole simulation thing seem less scary than it sounds. He has a much more chill view on it in general. One of Chalmers' key points is that if we are living in a simulation, it wouldn't necessarily change our everyday experiences or the fact that we have minds and are conscious. He thinks that even if our world is just some sophisticated simulation, it would still be real to us. Our feelings, thoughts, experiences, it'd still be genuine, even if the actual reality is different from what we see it as. So he looks at more the philosophical side rather than the scientific details. He's interested in how a scenario like this would impact our understanding of reality and consciousness. Finally, though, we have a story again from Reddit user RespectRemarkable294 with a post entitled, "I was never there before." She writes, "I had never in my life been to Universal, but when I was planning our dual vacation at Disney and Universal, my kids kept asking me what rides were at Disney because I had been there before, and I told them every single ride and every detail that I could remember. The Mummy, Men in Black, The Simpsons, you get the picture. Only to realize not one of them are at Disney rides. My explanation, well, maybe Disney used to own them. I know, stupid, but whatever gets me through the day. We go on our trip and go to Men in Black and we're waiting in line and I tell my husband everything that's gonna happen right before it's happening. It's like I remembered a script. Same thing is happening on all the other rides. However, it doesn't happen on the newer ones, like Harry Potter rides, etc. I called my mom and asked her again if we'd ever been there when we were young, and again she told me no. I am 38 years old. I would have definitely remembered, but I keep asking. It just feels wrong and I feel like I'm being lied to. I also know for a fact that I never have been to Universal and I've never been on these rides prior. I never watched videos either. I hate having rides ruined with them. So if the universe we're living in is really as expansive as it appears to be, why do we seem to be alone? Now, this is assuming, of course, you don't believe we've already made contact with aliens. I can go either way on this. I find some of the stories pretty convincing, but I've never actually seen a UFO or an alien myself. For the purpose of this point, let's just say the government is not keeping aliens hidden away in some underground lab somewhere. So if not, then where the hell are they? For all the transmissions and probes we've sent out into space, you'd think we'd have made some form of contact by now. All your friends are just other humans. I don't know if you've noticed, unless you're pets, you got pets, maybe those could be your friends. But yeah, I mean, there's no Klingons or Wookiees anywhere to be seen. So the point is, maybe we haven't made contact with anything because space really isn't as massive as it appears to be.
nothing is, because none of this is really here. It's just a highly advanced simulation with only enough RAM to render one advanced civilization at a time. Or maybe everything we see is technically here, but it's all been artificially created by some advanced being that we have no way of contacting.
It is possible that a team of scientists conducted an experiment that found proof that we are living in a simulated universe. Back in 2017, these scientists at the University of Washington totally shook up the scientific world when they proved that they could sneak computer code into real human DNA. If you're like me, you're probably wondering why on earth they would need to ever do that, and the answer is to expose a vulnerability in gene sequencing computers. But by showing that our biological building blocks could be hacked, just like computer code, they may have accidentally opened up Pandora's box. By showing that our DNA can be hacked like a computer code, they may have shown something that is straight out of the Matrix. Maybe what we thought was our biological reality is actually just zeros. It's basically like finding out that we're living in a super advanced simulation where DNA isn't just the stuff of life, it's the stuff of code.
Next up, we have the climate simulation theory. So some have speculated that our world might actually be a giant simulation in order to test out how to deal with a global crisis like climate change, for example. First, there's the idea that our civilization is headed towards big trouble because of climate change. We're messing with the environment with all, the pollution and stuff. And if we keep going like this, it could lead to some serious problems like floods, droughts, and all sorts of other bad stuff. Now, some folks think that maybe all this chaos is happening because we're actually part of a simulation, that maybe some super advanced beings created our world as a simulation to see how we deal with a big energy crisis or world-ending issue. I mean, it would make sense. If we had the ability ourselves to create a virtual world within a computer to test out how to deal with various problems, we totally would. So maybe that's exactly what's happening right now, and we just don't know it.
What if a teeny tiny little measurement is what breaks the simulation? Enter the Planck length. This super small measurement is like the Lego brick of the universe. At this small of a scale, even our own physics, like the concepts of gravity and space-time, aren't really quite sure what to do, and the rules no longer apply. This is exactly what has simulation enthusiasts wondering, could this little measurement be the simulation's way of showing that it is in fact just that? A simulation. Each Planck length is a single pixel, one bit of information. Could this be the blueprints to the Matrix?
How do you explain all the unexplained things people have been claiming to experience since pretty much the dawn of time? That's a bizarre sentence. Doors slamming on their own, phantom footsteps, apparitions. Well, people will either say it was a ghost, and then non-believers scoff. But they don't really have much of an explanation of their own other than some form of your brain was playing some sort of trick on you. Is that really the best explanation that we can come up with, though? That we're just hearing or seeing things that aren't really there? Maybe there's a meatier explanation, something with a little more substance. Maybe paranormal experiences are actually glitches in the Matrix. Those translucent figures people have seen in old buildings wearing old Victorian era clothing could be the computer just glitching, showing a brief flash of something that's already happened. Same thing with the phantom sounds like footsteps or laughter or fart. Why do we never hear ghost farts? You know what I mean? It's always footsteps, laughter, creepy stuff, but it's never anything funny.
Next, I'm gonna hit you with a bit of an Uno reverse here. Nuclear physicist Zora Davuti serves up a mind-bending idea. Cosmic rays, those cosmic cannonballs of energy, could hold the key to unlocking the truth behind the simulation theory. In a simulated universe, these rays might look like chunky pixels on an old school video game screen, while in the real deal, they'd stretch out like never-ending spaghetti strands. But here's the real kicker. Even if we found these pixelated particles, there's no guarantee we're not just caught up in some super advanced version of The Sims. What I mean by this is summed up perfectly by NYU philosopher David Chalmer. Quote, "You're not going to get proof that we're not in a simulation because any evidence that we get could be simulated. Proving we're not in a simulation is like trying to catch fog with a net. Any evidence we could dig up could be part of the simulation itself, leaving us scratching our heads. So next time you feel like reality's playing tricks on you, just remember, it might be because we're all just pixels in someone else's reality.
Alright, this next one is pretty trippy. It has to do with some bizarre behavior seen in electrons. There's a famous physics experiment called the double slit experiment. Scientists shoot tiny particles, electrons, through two slits in a barrier, and the expectation is that you'll see this wave-like pattern on a screen behind it. But when scientists actually watch as these electrons go through the slits, suddenly the pattern on the screen changes. It's not wave-like anymore. The electrons end up behaving more like particles. So why does this happen? We're still not sure, but some people cite this as possible evidence that we might be living in a simulation. Maybe the so-called program running our simulated world conserves resources and only shows us certain things when we're actually paying attention to them.
You know the classic children's tale of Goldilocks, where she's always looking for the thing that's not too hot, not too cold, but just right? I swear I'm not going crazy, this is just the best way to describe the position of our planet Earth. Scientists have dubbed our place in the universe as the Goldilocks zone, where we are the perfect distance away from our sun so that it's not too hot where humans wouldn't be able to live, and it's not too cold where all our water is frozen, and so are we. Here's where the simulation twist comes in. How likely is it that we were placed here just because we had a stroke of good luck? If you were designing a reality, you would of course want to put your characters in a place where they are the most likely to survive. That doesn't mean that you still don't do crazy stuff like take the ladder out of the pool or conveniently forget to put doors in the house, but it's just a way to give the characters a baseline to thrive.
Here's a bit of a different take on this whole thing, but still very valid. Our perception of reality is just flawed. In a way, we're all kind of living in our own little simulations, interpreting all the information that's thrown at us with our own flawed human senses and emotions. We all kind of live in our own world, don't we? Our perception of reality is based on our past memories and experiences, our upbringing, our own personal abilities to interpret information. It's based on all kinds of things, and sometimes our perception ends up lining up with other people's, but in all kinds of other ways it doesn't. Just ask your ex who said what to who. This is why eyewitness testimony is often one of the least credible types of evidence in court, and even when it comes to stuff that's right in front of us, we never really all agree. Remember the dress that was clearly white and gold? Actually, did you think it was white and gold or blue and black?
It's blue and black.
Blue? Really?
Yeah.
Oh my god. Chris?
I think so. It's blue and black.
Damn, alright, so I'm the only one in the room. Damn. Alright. I thought it was white and gold. That's what I think. For some reason though, other people say blue and black. In reality though, it's pretty much split down the middle. If you ask most people, it'll be pretty 50-50, and that's kinda nuts. So if something as simple as a photograph like that can be this like divisive, not hard to imagine why it's so tough to wrap our heads around reality itself.
Also, that will be James' last video. I will not have any white and gold truthers over here. Imagine a team of scientists that come together with powerful computers and a ton of curiosity, and they all start to recreate the entire universe, but in digital form. Well, that actually happened in 2014. The brilliant people at the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics pulled off a mind-bending feat when they linked up 8,000 computers to create a huge simulation of our universe that stretched 350 million light years across. They didn't stop here, but they ended up hitting fast forward and aging the universe 13 billion years, I guess, just to see what awaits us. They could basically see the entire universe from the Big Bang to the present day all on a computer screen. This all goes to show that not only are we interested in creating simulations, but we're also pretty good at them, and we're only getting better. And if we can create our own simulations, what's to say that we aren't living in a super advanced civilization's simulation? And hey, if you need further proof that we're suckers for simulations, just look at the wildly popular video game franchise, The Sims. With over 125 million copies sold in its first decade alone, it's clear that we humans have a knack for playing with virtual worlds. So when you think about it, if future generations of humanity have the chops to whip up even more realistic simulations, it wouldn't be a shocker if they decided to dive headfirst into the digital sandbox of existence. Who knows? Maybe we're just characters in someone else's video game. Cue the existential crisis.
What you're looking at here is a photo of one of the Belmez faces. What are the Belmez faces, you ask? The story begins in 1971 in a little Spanish town called Belmez. A woman named Maria Gomez Camara looks down at her kitchen floor and swears that she sees a human face forming in the concrete. Not like a stain or a crack that kind of resembles something, an actual detailed face. Her husband and son freaked out, smashed the thing with a pickaxe, poured new concrete, but within days, another face appeared. Word spread, and the mayor himself told the family not to destroy this new one. Instead, chunks of the floor were cut out and taken away to be studied. Meanwhile, people started flocking to this house, which became known as the House of the Faces. And the faces didn't stop. Over the years, new ones popped up. Men and women, young and old. Some even seemed to change slightly over time, like they were alive in the concrete. Paranormal investigators floated the idea that it was thoughtography. Basically that Maria's house or her subconscious was somehow imprinting these faces from the spirit world onto the floor. Skeptics have tested samples and come back with theories about paint or chemicals, but in 2014, a forensic team tried to recreate the phenomenon, but they couldn't pull it off. Their conclusion? Inconclusive. To this day, these faces are still a mystery. This image was shared by Reddit user OKTwist3079. Doesn't look to be anything odd in this image at first glance. We got 3 cute dogs in Christmas outfits playing in the snow, but the Redditor only has 2 dogs. OKTwist writes, "I took this photo of my 2 dogs. So please explain how there are 3 dogs in the photo. No one was visiting and I have no idea how to use Photoshop. My mother-in-law is freaking out and I have no explanation. The fact that they're all wearing the same outfit and all in different positions, I'm just losing it. How?" Now, obviously, this isn't double exposure. This was snapped on an Android phone. I'm no expert on camera glitches, but doesn't really look like one to me. Doesn't seem to be any interference in the image. Again, if you didn't have the context, you'd think this was a totally normal photo. Any ideas, folks? Genuine curiosity or hoax? Share your thoughts down below. What you're looking at here is photographic evidence of one of the most mysterious and well-documented UFO events in history. It started on the night of July 19th, 1952. Air traffic controllers at Washington National Airport picked up 7 unidentified objects on radar. Controllers said the blips looked solid, like actual aircraft. At the same time, pilots in the air were reporting strange lights moving above them. One pilot described them as glowing balls that shot across the sky faster than any jet could follow. Then radar at Andrews Air Force Base, just outside DC, confirmed the exact same objects. One point, controllers said the UFOs were hovering over the White House and Capitol building. Fighter jets were scrambled, but whenever they got close, the objects just vanished. As soon as the jets left, the UFOs came back. That little cat and mouse game happened over and over. Not just that night, but again a week later on July 26th. The press went wild. Headlines in major papers screamed, "Saucers swarm over Capitol." It got so insane that President Truman personally asked for a briefing. The Air Force didn't really have an explanation, but they just said, well, it's temperature inversion. Basically a rare weather condition that can cause issues for radar, but that of course doesn't explain the pilots who saw lights with their own eyes. Well, this car's clearly totaled. Whoever was in that car must have been pancaked to death, right? Wrong. On a November evening in 1988, Rose Benvenuto swerved to avoid hitting a stray dog in upstate New York, resulting in this brutal crash. Most people would have been killed, but somehow, remarkably, Rose walked away with barely a scratch. That's when things got even stranger, because a firefighter named Sharon Boo took pictures of the wrecked car, and in one of her shots, the one we're looking at again here, there's clearly this glowing, transparent figure hovering by the vehicle. The figure is ghost-like, you can see through it, but it's clearly there in the image. And the figure showed up not only in that print, but also on the negative, so it wasn't a development trick or double exposure. Both Rose and Sharon went on to label the figure a guardian angel, maybe the very being that saved Rose's life. Reddit user Nakupendwa posted this image. My dad got me these when I was a youngish teenager from a trip they went on to Las Vegas. They write, I've only ever had this one set. It was spilled in the drawer, so I started putting them back in and ... And yeah, this is pretty strange. Obviously, stuff like this can easily be faked, but let's just say this Reddit user did happen to experience this. I'd be pretty unsettled. I mean, there are only 6 spaces in that container for 6 dice. Unless someone snuck an extra one in there as a prank, I don't have a solid explanation for this. Is this bus driving back from a Taylor Swift concert? Whoever was running the simulation when this image was taken just forgot to attend the diversity and inclusion seminar that morning. Or they just got lazy and decided to hit copy and paste and call it a day. Or I don't know, maybe they're all related. Or they could be one of those female friend groups that are all just blonde ladies, like with barely any discernible physical differences. Someone described them as maybe basic, drink a lot of Starbucks, their fiancés' names are Brad, they talk about Jesus a lot, you know the crowd. I've never actually hung out with people like this, but you know, am I reading too much into it? Probably. But am I probably right? Probably. So this is nuts. Are they doppelgangers? I mean, not only do they look very similar in size, shape, and face, but their clothes match, they have the same backpacks, their drinks are the same, for God's sakes. It seems too uncanny to be a coincidence. So there's a good chance they're also twins. If that's the case, then this is just hilarious. You don't really see adult twins dressing the exact same clothes, buying the same knapsacks and beverages, unless it's a cartoon, or possibly, in this case, a simulation. Back in October, people near Grissom Joint Air Reserve Base in Indiana got a front row seat to something strange in the sky. Multiple glowing orange orbs, at least 6, were seen darting around, hovering, flickering, and then just disappearing. Witnesses were pretty freaked out. It wasn't just what people saw with their eyes either. One observer checked their Doppler radar and noticed a massive rectangular shape with a vapor shock wave trailing behind it. That's basically a trail that happens when something moves insanely fast through the air. The shape was estimated to be about 20 miles long. Naturally, skeptics chimed in. Alejandro Rojas from Enigma Labs said it might just be military flares, pointing to the way the lights lit up and faded in a row, but that doesn't explain everything, especially since this wasn't an isolated incident. Similar UFO sightings popped up near other military bases, like in Virginia just months earlier. What you're looking at here are burns on a woman's hands, and this is a newspaper clipping of the same woman's hair starting to fall out in clumps. These unsettling images are photographic evidence of the Cash Landrum incident. On the night of December 29th, 1980, 3 people in Texas had a disturbing encounter with a UFO. Betty Cash, Vicki Landrum, and Vicki's grandson Colby were driving home when they noticed this massive diamond-shaped object hovering over the trees. It was throwing off flames, extreme heat. At first, Vicki thought that this was a religious sign, something like the Second Coming. She told Betty to stop the car, but once they got out, the heat was just unbearable. The thing was so hot that when Betty touched the car, her hand burned and Vicky's handprint got seared into the dashboard. As the object suddenly started climbing back into the sky, a swarm of military helicopters appeared and surrounded it. But the aftermath is what really pushes this story into the disturbing territory. That night, all 3 of them started to feel sick. Betty ended up with blisters, her hair started falling out, and later she was diagnosed with cancer. Vicky developed a cataract. Their symptoms seemed to line up eerily well with radiation exposure. They eventually sued the US government for $20 million, pointing to those helicopters as proof that the military knew more than they were letting on, but the case was dismissed. To this day, no one can fully explain what they ran into on that empty Texas road. This is one of the most famous images ever taken of a mysterious phenomenon over the skies of Norway. In the Hasdalen Valley of Norway, people keep reporting these strange glowing lights that just can't be explained. They'll show up in the middle of the night or sometimes during the day, sometimes floating for over an hour, other times flashing across the sky in just seconds. They don't always look the same either. Sometimes they're white, sometimes red or yellow, and they'll drift slowly or dart around. Scientists have tried to explain them as some kind of natural plasma caused by the metals in the hills reacting with the environment, but that doesn't match every sighting. The movements are just too strange. That's why Hasdalen is still considered one of the most active UFO hotspots in the world.